This is Bloomberg Businessweek Daily, reporting from the magazine that helps global leaders stay ahead, with insight on the people, companies, and trends shaping today's complex economy, plus global business, finance, and tech news as it happens. Bloomberg Businessweek Daily with Carol Massar and Tim Stenovec, live on Bloomberg Radio, television, YouTube, and Bloomberg Originals.
Hey, thanks so much, Joe, to you and the team down in Washington for keeping us updated on everything out of Washington, D.C. and beyond over the last 2 hours. As Joe mentioned, we are glued to the monitors. What's happening in the cabinet room. We'll bring you any commentary, live commentary, as we do get it from the president. You can also check out the coverage on Live Go on the Bloomberg terminal. It is Bloomberg Businessweek Daily. I'm Tim Stenovec, along with Isabelle Lee from the Bloomberg News Cross Asset team. She is in for Carol Massar on this Tuesday afternoon. And here's the setup on this Tuesday afternoon, because, Isabelle, we are squarely focused on everything happening outside of Washington, D.C., or emanating from Washington, D.C., on the president's push to remove Federal Reserve Governor Lisa Cook.
I know, it really raises the question of the fragility of the Federal Reserve, their credibility, and whether this is really political and what will be the president moving forward. That
story is informing our conversations this afternoon, every single one of them. We're going to be speaking with Enda Curran. He's global economy reporter. He's going to be joining us in just a few minutes. Also, we're going to talk to the co-head of asset allocation and portfolio manager over at GMO. Ben Winkler is going to be joining us a little later as well. Also, front and center, we are going to be looking at comments from Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick. He made them earlier. He suggested that the government is looking at the defense sector. Bloomberg Intelligence senior defense analyst Wayne Sanders is going to be joining us in just a minute. All that and more coming up over the next hour right here on Bloomberg Businessweek Daily. First up, though, he has been watching the markets. He is standing by. Charlie Pellet is giving us an update.
Hi, thank you very much. Little change, perhaps the key takeaway at this hour. You mentioned Howard Lutnick and those defense stocks, specifically Lockheed Martin. Lockheed Martin up now by 1.6%. Little change, though, for the rest of the major indexes and averages. Right now, we have got the S&P up 2 points, the Dow lower by 4, and NASDAQ is advancing 12 now, up by just under 0.1%. The Bloomberg Mag 7 index trading lower by 0.2%. NVIDIA, a big part of that index, NVIDIA up 0.9%. It reports tomorrow after the close of trading, and right now the 10-year at 4.25%, with the 2-year 3.68%. Spot gold up 0.5%, 33.81 the ounce. West Texas Intermediate crude down 2.3%, 63.33 a barrel. We're keeping an eye on Apple shares up 0.4%. Apple plans to hold its fall product launch on September 9th, when the company is expected to introduce an iPhone 17 lineup that includes a new skinnier version of its signature device. Recapping, S&P just about flat on the day, up now under 0.1%. I'm Charlie Pellet. That is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
Hey, thanks so much for that update, Charlie Pellet. As I mentioned, we're keeping focused on everything happening out of Washington, D.C. The president speaking at a cabinet meeting. We're going to have more on that when he does start to take questions. In the meantime, also on our agenda today is the latest with the New York City mayoral election. Let's head on over to Gracie Mansion, where we find Bloomberg News senior reporter Myles Miller. He's on location there for a conversation with New York City Mayor Eric Adams. Hey, Myles.
That's right, and we're sitting down with the mayor here in Gracie Mansion. And the first thing we want to talk about with the mayor is the National Guard. You know, Donald Trump said just yesterday, if these mayors can't control their streets, we will. And he listed New York among the cities under review for National Guard deployment. Do you believe this is a real threat to New York?
Well, the partnership between the federal government and the city and state governments is extremely important. And I think there's a role we need. My role is to make sure New Yorkers are safe, and the numbers are showing we're doing that. And the partnership of making sure guns don't come into our city. And that's what we want to continue to do with the federal government. We already collaborate with the federal government every morning, 10 a.m. with HIDA, city, state, and federal authorities, to go after shooters and those who bring guns into our cities.
When he talks about the National Guard potentially coming here to New York, and in the event that that happens, is there anything you can do to counteract that? I mean, you know, what would it look like if National Guard's members, you saw in D.C., 2,000 of them on the streets of Washington, if they were here, you know, on 90th Street?
Well, the goal is the relationship between the federal government and D.C. is different than the relationship between New York City and the federal government. And again, our communications with the federal government is we got this. We removed over 23,000 illegal guns off our streets. We're witnessing record levels of decreasing crimes, homicides, and shootings in the first 6 months, and shooting victims in the first 7 months. And so we are very clear, always have been. I have never moved away from the public safety. That's the prerequisite to our prosperity, and we're going to continue to do an amazing job. And if the federal government wants to communicate with us and ask us to go to other municipalities and help them see what we're doing, we're willing to do that, because a safe America is a safe New York City, and we want to help any way we can.
You know, I want to ask you about November election as it relates to that. You know, one of your opponents, Andrew Cuomo, has said if Mamdani gets in office, then Trump takes control of New York City. Then Trump does put the National Guard here. Do you think that could happen?
Andrew would say anything to anyone to get elected. He created this. He passed the cannabis laws. I had to close down 1,500 cannabis shops because of the failed law he passed. He did the bail reform. That's the revolving door criminal justice system that we're looking at. He closed psychiatric beds. So every time you see someone push someone on the subway track because of severe mental health illness or stab 3 innocent New Yorkers, you have to ask yourself, why do we close those beds? Raise the age. We're seeing young people are victims of crimes more and more, and they're shooters as well. These are all of his bills. I had to fix his mess. And so Mamdani's call to defund police, his calls to legalize prostitution, his calls to empty Rikers Island, they're two of the same people. New York has come too far to go backwards with either one of them.
When I heard the president talk yesterday about cashless bail, you know, I immediately thought of you, because you have been one of the people who has talked about bail reform. Your police commissioner talked about bail reform on Friday with the friendly fire incident involving the officer. The president signing an executive order directing DOJ to look at these jurisdictions that have done cashless bail. What's your take on that? Well,
I've been clear. And I don't believe if someone steals an apple that we should hold them in jail because they can't afford to get out. But if you are possessing an illegal weapon, you commit one of the 7 major crime categories in our city, you are repeatedly an offender, we need to look at the criminal justice system that allows you to continue to go back and you repeat the crime. We saw what happened with the Customs Border Patrol agent. These were repeated offenders. We just had a shooting over the weekend. The individuals involved, they had several gun arrests. That just can't continue to happen. And so using bail appropriately, I think it would help us deal with the public safety issue we're facing in the city.
The president said, you know, crime has continued to rise when they have cashless bail. Is that something that's happened here in the city?
When you remove bail on those who commit serious crimes, it will impact your public safety. We are witnessing that over and over again.
The school system comes back next week. Should parents fear for ICE to be in their schools? You know, in Washington, that was a big fear as they went back to school yesterday, with ICE saying that they may come to some schools of students. We saw a student in Queens, 6 years old, deported by ICE with her mother.
With a family. And so we want to be clear, ICE has not been in our schools. ICE, only way they could come into the schools with clear judicial warrants, or if they are looking at a condition where someone is fleeing, running into the school, a dangerous person, but that's the role of our police officers to do so. And we have been extremely consistent around this. Children should go to school. They're not going to be fearful of having ICE come into their schools. Their directives indicate that as well. People should go to the hospital if they need medical care. They should call the police if they need police assistance. And I know personally what happens when you fail to do that. My rookie years as a police officer, I had a Chinese immigrant that was afraid to call the police when he was being robbed. I took actions while I was off duty, but he was extremely fearful. People can't live in the shadows. That creates disorder, and we don't want that.
Let's go back to your career in the transit police. It's where you met Ingrid Lewis Martin's husband, obviously someone someone you've known a long time. I just, we heard from you on Friday, but when you hear some of the allegations in the indictment, and, indictments just show a piece of what is being alleged, what did you make of some of the allegations you heard?
Well, first of all, let's think about this for a moment. Like I said, Ingrid's like a sister to me. And I'm pretty sure you have close relationships in your life. And the worst thing you want to do is not allow people their due process. And when you're dealing with criminal cases, every word you say could harm that person who's dealing with that case. And I'm not going to do anything to harm someone that's like a sister to me. I'm very clear. She's in my prayers. She has an attorney. And anything that's dealing with that case should be brought to her attorney. I would not do anything that's going to be harmful to someone that's like a sister to me.
How would you say your week was last week? Because you had the situation with Ingrid, Jesse Hamilton as well, and then you also had the situation with Winnie Greco. Just what's your thoughts on what happened with Winnie Greco, and then also, it was. I saw by Friday it was a week.
Yeah, no, not to me. I had 237,000 migrants and asylum seekers. I inherited COVID. I inherited a city that was hemorrhaging jobs. I had thousands of illegal guns on our streets, ghost cars on our streets, cannabis shops open. People wrote off New Yorkers. Not only was I dealing with those who were committing crimes, I had to deal with rats everywhere. But look, everywhere that we dealt with, we got up every day and we did the job.
But the red envelope in a potato chip bag. I mean, when you heard about this, what did you think of it?
First, I want to go back. More jobs in our city history, 12 months of tourism, 12 months of Broadway, the best in the city's history, unemployment drop, crime drop, illegal vehicles off our street, all of those things. I'm not going to be judged by a red envelope in a paper bag. I'm going to be judged by how I improved the lives of New Yorkers. It was a stupid thing to do. I don't understand the conversation she had with the reporter. I don't have the history of it. It's not something that we would do in our campaign. I made that clear. I don't know what that was about. And now she's no longer volunteering, or she was never an employee of the campaign, and she was long time no longer in City Hall. So only the reporter and Winnie can explain to us exactly what that was about. I don't know what it was about, and it's not acceptable behavior on my part.
Let's talk campaign, because we've talked about the campaign plenty of times. Private meetings, public meetings, where have you. You're polling in the single digits behind Mamdani. I've heard you talk about, the state of the race when you were running last time, but that was sort of during the primary. Now we're in the general election. Just tell me sort of what's your strategies to win in November, and how you think you could pull through.
Well, a couple of things. As I said over and over again, when you look at this distance from the primary to the election, the same time period, Mamdani was at 1%. No one called for him to step out of the race. And if we did, we would have been premature because he won the primary. And we need to be clear that seems to be a fact that everyone is missing. We also missing the fact that I was in third place in 2021 behind Andrew Yang, who was beating me by double digits. Some polls have me in double digits. Some polls have me in single digits. Polls had Andrew Cuomo up by 10% before the election. He lost by 12%. He was up 36%. So when you start to talk about the polls, the only poll that matters on election day, who's going to have the most votes? I must do what I'm good at doing, campaigning, getting my information out to the public so they can see the success of where we were and where we are. This city has turned around. I mean, if we want to be honest about it or not, and I have to explain that to the voters.
So the message is Eric Adams is staying in no matter what?
Yes.
You're not signing any pledge?
Yes, I'm staying in no matter what. Who created the pledge? Andrew. One candidate that was at 1% in the poll all of a sudden said whoever's up by a certain number in September should win. That's all Andrew's creation. Trust me when I tell you, he creates these scenarios so that people can believe he's doing the right thing. He lost the race, $35 million, up by double digits, didn't get out in campaign, and he lost the race. People heard his message already.
Let's get to some Bloomberg topics here. One of your biggest accomplishments that you've stated has been City of Yes. Just tell me, what it took to get that through. Housing, a big issue for, voters and for people who own homes here, who want to own homes here. You have a lack of places to put homes, but City of Yes changed that. Just, explain how that's worked out.
In so many ways, many people talk about affordability, but never use their offices to actually produce affordability. Like I said, 5 people running for office, 3 people don't have a record. 1 person is running from his record. I have a record. City of Yes is going to produce housing throughout the city, because housing in New York is not just a Manhattan or Brooklyn or areas that would gentrify. It's the entire city. Never before have we witnessed this most comprehensive housing and rezoning policy in the history of our city. We have built, renovated, and planned rezoning for 426,000 units of housing in the next decade. I mean, this is unbelievable when you think about it. We did it in 3.5 years. That number is larger than 12 years of Bloomberg, 8 years of de Blasio combined in 3.5 years. We are the most housing-forward administration in the history of this city, and we got projects off the ground that many have tried, like Willis Point, 2,400 units of affordable housing, Flushing Airport, hundreds of units of affordable housing, Union built. And so City of Yes is part of the overall package that we're doing. 5 rezonings in each borough, 50,000 units of housing that's coming out of that. So we know New Yorkers must be housed, but you got to match housing with using the resources of city to make the city affordable. Decreasing the cost of child care, universal child care, no income tax for low-income New Yorkers, none at all. What we have done.
Well, that sounds like, like no income tax for low-income New Yorkers sounds a lot like a Mamdani proposal, and that requires going to Albany to get that done. People may say, you've been in office for, nearly 4 years. How come you haven't been able to get that done? Just make the case for how you could get that done. With 4 more years.
Well, no, we already got it done. There is no income tax for low-income New Yorkers. And then what you do is each year you go to Albany. They call it a 10-cup day for a reason. You go up there to beg for your proposal. But look at each year. Each year we got exactly the things we asked for. Mayoral control, we got the no income tax, we got housing reform, renovating our office spaces into permanent housing, low income housing, we got the public safety initiative, we got the involuntary removal. So you're seeing each year we brought back what we needed from the city. And so in 3 years and 8 months, we've done a great job of partnering with our Albany lawmakers.
And that's Mayor Eric Adams talking directly to Bloomberg terminal customers and listeners all around the world. I'll send it back to the studio.
Hey, thanks so much. Myles Miller, he's Bloomberg News senior reporter up there at Gracie Mansion, along with Mayor Eric Adams, of course, the mayor of New York City. I do want to bring in Shree Taylor right now. She's Bloomberg reporter who covers New York City. I think the big takeaway that I had from Myles' interview just now was this mayor is staying in the race. He said, quote, "I'm staying in no matter what." This despite many different polls showing him far behind Zohran Mamdani, even far behind Andrew Cuomo, and in some cases behind Curtis Sliwa, the Republican challenger.
Right. I mean, he clearly has a lot of ground to cover, but that's not discouraging him, which I think is very interesting, considering usually the incumbent is the more popular candidate. But right now we have Mamdani and even Cuomo, who are kind of in very, very close competition with each other, and then he's just trailing super far behind.
What is the sentiment towards Eric Adams, and what does he need to do to really clinch that win?
The sentiment is not great. As we know, our mayor has been embroiled in controversy for years now, and especially during his current campaign. His former top advisor is facing fresh charges over allegations that she accepted bribes and steering city contracts for asylum seeker shelters to property owners. So the sentiment isn't very positive. I think in order to clinch the win, he kind of needs to win over the crowd that's backing Cuomo right now, which is moderate to right-leaning folks, the wealthier citizens and folks like that.
Myles really pressed him on the scandal, the alleged scandals last week, the $100 bills in the potato chip bag, the challenges that he's had with a former senior advisor who's found herself wrapped up in alleged wrongdoing, and he didn't want to touch it. He basically pushed back and used that as an opportunity to talk about his accomplishments under his close to 4 years, 3.5 years as mayor of New York City. It's certainly a media strategy, but is that the type of thing that the voters are going to focus on? Do the alleged scandals, what he's found himself wrapped up in during his tenure, does that matter with voters?
Right. Well, I'd say deflecting has kind of been his style, ever since his larger scandal when it came to Turkey and the flights. He says he's very good at campaigning and getting his information out to the public. He said he's staying no matter what and has remained kind of steadfast in maintaining his innocence in just about every scandal that has stirred up during his tenure and during this campaign. So I think he's going to continue. That's what's he claims is working for him, and I think that's what he's going to continue to do. What I'm seeing is that I think that New Yorkers are ready for a politician that is taking accountability on the backdrop of the Trump administration and a lot of the members that are kind of coming out of there and the scandals that are coming out of there. So I think that, citizens are kind of looking for a change and might want something fresher.
All right. Shvi Taylor covers New York City. She's a reporter for Bloomberg News. Appreciate you joining us. And also thank you to Myles Miller for that interview with Mayor Eric Adams. Now to our top story and among the most read on the Bloomberg terminal. What is going on with the Federal Reserve? President Trump, just to remind everybody, moved to oust Federal Reserve Governor Lisa Cook following allegations that she falsified mortgage documents. It's a dramatic escalation in the president's battle for more control over the U.S. central bank that unnerved investors. The president is right now taking questions in a cabinet meeting. If you do want to follow along, you can check it out live on the Bloomberg terminal, Live Go, and we will bring you updates as he answers questions. In a letter, though, posted last night on True Social, the president said he had, quote, sufficient cause to fire Cook based on the allegations from a White House ally that she made false statements to one or more mortgage loans. Lisa Cook, for her part, said that President Trump has no authority to fire her and she will not step down. Her lawyer issued a statement on Tuesday saying she would sue. I want to bring in Enda Curran, Bloomberg News global economy reporter. He joins us from our Washington, D.C. bureau. And the president has never fired a Federal Reserve governor before. The law does say, quote, a Fed member can be removed for cause by the president. Based on the folks you've spoken to, the analysis that you've read, the reading of the law, does this count as for cause?
Well, as you mentioned, this is both fast-moving and unprecedented. So there's a lot here that nobody's quite sure in terms of how it will play out. On the legal side of this, obviously the president has taken the decision that he announced last night, as you outlined, using this justification of for cause. Governor Cook, of course, is pushing back against that and will have her own legal defence against the president's decision. But there is a lot of discussion around what this at cause clause actually means. Does it cover a Fed official's time in office? Does it cover what they did before they went into office? Do the circumstances that are surrounding Ms. Cook at the moment, did they classify, or do they meet the bar for what could be considered at cause? These are questions that I've seen several academics asking this morning and throughout the day, so there's no clear answer on it. There's clearly going to be a whole legal side of this that will take some time to play out in the courts. And then there's the policy side, the practical side, which is on paper. You have critics saying a clear direct attack on the Fed and Fed's independence. It opens up potentially a new seat on the board, presumably for someone who has the same economic view as President Trump, which is for lower interest rates. And that in itself feeds through to a very different policy debate in the months ahead in terms of where interest rates are going. So, as I say, the legal side of this, which there seems to be a lot of uncertainty, and that will take its time to play out through the courts. And then there's the implication for policy, for the Fed as an institution, and the policy side, and where that goes from here as well.
But what legal arguments is Cook's team likely to make in defense of her position? What grounds does she and her team have under existing statutes?
Well, we're waiting to see what that defence will be. Governor Cook has made the point that she will be responding. She will not be bullied out of office. That's been the point she has made before. And her lawyers commented today that they will be mounting their own legal defence in all of this. So in due process, those details are expected to come out. But clearly, the big talking point is this idea that a governor can be dismissed for at cause. That's hasn't been tested before. There isn't precedent for this, so the definition of that is kind of in the eye of the beholder. Obviously, critics of, in this case, Governor Cook, make the point that it fits that definition. Those who are critical of what the White House is doing, accusing this of being a political witch hunt, make the point that it doesn't. So obviously there's clearly split opinion on that. But that's where the legal argument will probably rest in terms of how at cause is defined and agreed on in the weeks and maybe months ahead through the courts.
And one of the reasons we wanted to speak with you is because you cover the global economy. You understand the role of central banks throughout the world and the distinct role they have in different countries where there isn't necessarily the same precedent of independence from politics that there is in the United States. I'm wondering about global implications for this, or economic implications perhaps, if the president is successful in removing Lisa Cook.
Oh, it's very important. I mean, if, just for argument's sake, say by the end of this process, it's been agreed that the Fed's independence has been damaged somewhat. It seemed to now be much more within the political realm, at the whim of the White House, for example, as critics say. Well, that sends a powerful signal to the rest of the world, because a lot of these smaller central banks in economies around the world take their lead from the Fed. It's the world's most powerful central bank. It's the standard setter for what has happened in central bank independence over the past few decades. So you could argue there could be a domino effect, and that's certainly what those who are concerned about what's happening with the Fed are saying right now. That if the Fed goes, others will follow. Other politicians, other parliaments, other presidents will pile similar criticism on their central banks. Now, not all central banks are independent. Certainly in the emerging world, they are not. China's obviously being a case in point. But nonetheless, there is academic literature that makes the point that having that central bank operating at arm's length from the electoral cycle, from the political process, has, on balance, been better in terms of the economic results it has returned. Now, to be clear, that's not saying they're not totally removed from democratic oversight. They come under their parliaments, they come under Congress, there are checks and balances, but there's an argument that keeping it that bit at arm's length from the electoral cycle has proven to be better for the economy over time.
Well, we are speaking with Enda Curran. He's a global economy reporter for Bloomberg News. We're also monitoring what's happening in the White House right now, the president having a cabinet meeting. Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth is speaking now. We will bring you any headlines and updates as we do get them.
And what might be the political motivations behind targeting Lisa Cook specifically? We know that her term is not set to expire until 2038.
Well, again, the White House would say that this is not a political campaign or strategy against the Fed, but plenty of observers and critics make the point that this all feeds into the idea that President Trump wants interest rates to come down much faster than the Fed is signalling, and he wants them down for a variety of reasons, not least to bring down borrowing costs or refinancing costs for the government. And by targeting governors on the board, in this case Ms. Cook, it gives him an opportunity to replace her and put on, as I mentioned earlier, somebody who shares the same economic worldview as President Trump, which would be one for lower interest rates. So remember, it's not just this particular governor's seat that's up for grabs at the moment, or potentially up for a decision. We have former Governor Kugler's seat became vacant a few weeks ago. We have the nomination of Mr. Moran for that from the White House. Then, of course, we have the interview process that's kicking off soon for the Fed chair. If you look over the 6-month window period ahead, there's potentially significant change coming for the personnel who run the Fed, and it's an opportunity for President Trump, of course, to put in appointees to his liking, which by extension would lean towards the view that it could be a dovish board willing to be more accommodating for what the White House wants. That's what all of the concern and critics are saying about this process. As I say, the White House say it's not a political campaign, but there's plenty of skepticism around that.
Enda Curran, Bloomberg News global economy reporter. Also, he was up late because as soon as I saw this news cross last night, I turned on Bloomberg TV, and there he was, Enda Curran, giving the latest to our team in Asia on the Federal Reserve, independence, and the firing, as President Trump wants to do, of Governor Lisa Cook. Well, the dollar fell, long-dated bond yields rose, and stocks wavered as President Trump's push to remove Fed Governor Lisa Cook fueled concerns about central bank independence and inflation risks. It's not just that, though. It's also NVIDIA tomorrow. We've been saying there's a lot riding on that report. It's the world's biggest stock. It makes up 3% of the global market cap of all public companies. We'll bring those numbers to you as soon as they cross tomorrow. This is the backdrop for our conversation with Ben Inker. He's co-head of asset allocation, portfolio manager at GMO. It's the Boston-based asset manager co-founded by Jeremy Grantham with $70 billion in assets under management. Ben looks closely at mega cap concentration. So yeah, NVIDIA certainly on his radar. He joins us from Boston. Ben, we're going to talk about the Mag 7 in the U.S. in the context of the rest of the world. But first, the threat of Fed independence, what we were just talking about with Enda Curran, who covers the global economy. The president saying he will fire Fed Governor Lisa Cook. If he is successful, does it change your view of U.S. markets?
It probably doesn't change my view all that much because we're pretty skeptical of at least the U.S. Stock market these days. It would create some more concerns for us about U.S. bonds and create more concern about the U.S. dollar, because I think if the president is successful in bullying the Federal Reserve into lowering interest rates more than the economy warrants, the two places that comes out are long-term bonds and the dollar. And the dollar, by virtue of being quite overvalued today, could fall really quite hard.
Do the president's attacks on the Federal Reserve confirm your skepticism? Does it essentially give you evidence that saying, hey, we are right in our call to be skeptical of U.S. equities right now?
Well, we do think it is part of one of the key problems for U.S. companies right now. The U.S. stock market is trading at a big premium to the rest of the world. That is an issue. The U.S. dollar is very overvalued. That is an issue. But the other thing we really worry about for the U.S. is the U.S. is facing a series of supply shocks that the rest of the world is not. So we've got the tariffs, which increase inflation and decrease economic activity. We've got the move against immigrants, which tends to do the same. And then we've got this uncertainty problem, where we have an administration that makes its decisions apparently by tweet, and where you really don't know week to week what is going to happen. And that makes it very difficult for US-based businesses to make good long-term investment decisions. This is part and parcel of that problem. So while I certainly hope the administration does not succeed in pushing a Fed governor off of the board on the basis of a criminal referral, because you can have a criminal referral on just about anyone for just about no reason at all. So I hope it doesn't happen. If it does, it's another sign of policy uncertainty in a country that is suddenly awash in it.
And we know that you are a skeptic of U.S. equities because of their high valuations, but the Magnificent Six dominate U.S. equity performance. What breaks their momentum, and what will you replace them with if they falter?
Yeah, I mean, to be clear, we are quite skeptical of the fact that the average U.S. company trades at a big premium to the average company in the rest of the world. The Magnificent Six, which is the Magnificent Seven ex Tesla, because Tesla is not only a very different company, it's also a much, much more expensive company than the rest. The Magnificent Six have been extraordinary in their ability to continue to grow at a scale where other companies in the past have really hit limits to growth. Now they're trading around 30 times earnings on average. That's, Lord knows that's not cheap. If they can maintain their kind of past levels of growth, it's still a perfectly reasonable valuation for them. The question is, can they maintain it? We're not honestly sure. One of the things that is very different from the past is they have hugely ramped up their aggregate capex. These were always very capital light businesses, had wonderful free cash flow. And today they are investing in aggregate hundreds of billions of dollars in property, plant, and equipment. And it's a huge bet that they are going to be able to make a lot of money out of AI. Will that come true? I don't know. If it does not, it is one of the most economically meaningful bets we've ever seen from the stock market, and could be a real problem for them.
Why do you think U.S. premium has persisted despite stronger growth overseas?
It's funny. I think some of it is the reflected glow of the Mag 6. Because of the Mag 6, the aggregate S&P has done better fundamentally. Right now, that fundamental outperformance is a piece of it. The dollar has been a big source of the outperformance because the dollar has appreciated by a lot over the last decade versus every other currency on the planet. And then the valuation in the US over the last decade has really expanded relative to the rest of the world. But there is this base of sort of fundamental outperformance, all of which is owed to the Mag 6. So the Mag 6 have been amazing over the last decade. They're expensive, but they're amazing. The rest of the U.S. has not been amazing, but has still captured some of the glow because they've been more associated with the Mag 6 than companies outside the U.S. And that I just don't see how it's sustainable, because those companies are going to have to do a lot better than they have in the past to justify their valuations.
We're speaking with Ben Anker, co-head of asset allocation, portfolio manager at GMO, of course, the co-founded firm by Jeremy Grantham, $70 billion in assets under management. Ben, on the valuation side, when it comes to the Mag 6, I know you've talked about U.S. stocks being more highly valued than international stocks. And if we look at stocks in the U.S., obviously that's based on where investors think they're going to go. You said it could be justified if they continue their growth rate as the way they've been growing in recent years. What would you say, though, to someone who says, well, the U.S. is a unique environment from a regulatory perspective, from an economic power perspective, from an international relations perspective, and there is this premium in the U.S. because, well, we have a regulatory environment that allows for that essentially says, okay, well, that is justified, that the rest of the world doesn't have. And indeed, we haven't seen outperformance of the rest of the world, save for the first few months of this year. We'll see what the future brings. But doesn't the U.S. deserve to have a premium on it based on those factors?
Look, if the U.S. deserves to have a premium, it would be on the basis of having a higher return on capital than we have in the rest of the world. There are plenty of countries where there are not a lot of regulations over what companies do. Most of the emerging world doesn't have that many regulations. The return on capital isn't necessarily that brilliant. They aren't wonderful places to operate. The U.S. has been a good place for businesses to operate. One, we are a very big market. Two, we have had a regulatory system that is very rules-based, very kind of slow to change, and it has been a good base to try to sell to the rest of the world. All of that is under threat right now. The U.S. is not such a brilliant place to be as a base for the rest of the world because things like steel and aluminum costs a lot more in the U.S. than they do anywhere else on Earth because we have the big tariffs on them. From a regulatory perspective, while the biggest the biggest victims might be companies providing wind power or looking to do so, we today operate in a world where the regulatory environment is much less predictable. And unfortunately, we also now operate in an environment where it is pretty clear that the way you want to get ahead, at least as a very large cap company, is getting in the good graces of the government, which is a very different game than we have had for the last 80 years in the U.S. And that, that pushes towards rent-seeking behavior. It pushes towards corrupt behavior. It is not a situation where you would say, aha, these are the companies that should be trading at a premium to the rest of the world. That is more like what we have seen in countries like Russia or China, where in general, people have said, ooh, well, if you're going to invest there, you better have a discount to make up for the fact that you don't know what the government is going to do. And the incentives for companies are not necessarily profit maximizing for shareholders.
Speaking of Washington, and we're going to have more questions on this, the president is having a cabinet meeting right now. We're monitoring it. if he does start to take questions, we will bring you those questions and answers as soon as we get them. Check out Live Go on the Bloomberg terminal to see that right now. Ben, on that, the idea of the U.S. government taking a stake in these companies, as you mentioned, it does concern you. We did hear from Howard Lutnick earlier on CNBC, who said the idea of taking a stake in a defense company, such as Lockheed Martin, for example, could be talked about at a certain point in the future. What's the warning that you have for U.S. involvement, U.S. government involvement in private enterprise?
Well, the basic problem is as the government gets more involved in private enterprise, the needs of shareholders take a back seat. And that isn't obviously, that isn't necessarily the absolute worst thing in the world. But we do see, and we have seen time and time again, where businesses are more answerable to the government than they are to their standard owners, you get less good business decisions. Now, on the other hand, if you are a defense contractor, it may well be in your interest to have the government take a stake, because if you are one where the government has not taken a stake, maybe you're less likely to win the next competition.
Ben, speaking of the president, we got to leave it there. Ben Inker, co-head of asset allocation, portfolio manager at GMO. Let's go to Washington, D.C., to the White House and hear from President Trump. Among the headlines, the president says he wants to stay in D.C. longer than 30 days, referring to National Guard troop presence in Washington, D.C. Speaking of defense, we're watching companies in aerospace and defense. This is the S15 Aerospace, S&P 500 aerospace companies. It's up 1.7% at 23 names in there. 21 are higher as we speak. Close to every name higher. This after Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick suggested the government is looking at the defense sector for potential stakes in companies. For more, we bring in Wayne Sanders. He's Bloomberg Intelligence senior defense analyst who, before joining Bloomberg, was a colonel in the U.S. Army. He specialized in technology, intelligence, operational planning, and counterinsurgency. Wayne joins us from our bureau in Washington, D.C. Wayne, the secretary singled out Lockheed Martin, claiming the company makes much of its revenue because of the U.S. government. He said, quote, on CNBC, quote, they are basically an arm of the U.S. government. Is that a fair assessment in your view? Are they an arm of the U.S. government?
Well, I think it's fair to say that that they're driven by the demand that comes from the Pentagon, right? So when you look at their long-range missile capabilities, air defense, all of those things, it's being driven by one customer, and that is the U.S. government, and they're backed by the contracts that they end up getting awarded at that time.
If the government were to take stakes in defense contractors like Lockheed Martin, how might this reshape the economics of the defense industry, and how will it affect R&D investment to profit margins?
Well, I think that one of the things you really have to look at is the way that the market's set up for the DoD already is something that is already a long pole in the tent, right? You look at things that they call the valley of death to be able to survive the market, and that's why you see a lot of the defense primes. They have the money necessary to be able to say, I have this capability. 2 years, when Congress gives me the money for it, I'll be able to put it towards that defense contractor. If you put something in like this, you're going to start to politicize part of that market competition. You're going to start to run into some problems where you're looking at there's normally like 19 checks and balances within the acquisition program in the DoD that allows to make sure that there's no conflict of interest, and you're going to potentially run into some of that. I see that it would work well in areas where the defense industrial base, like critical minerals and shipbuilding and potentially even munitions production, where it would make sense. But that's not specific to a company, right? MP Minerals was one of the ones that started this from a critical minerals perspective. But you're seeing that it's trying to focus on a specific area in which the industry is harder to invest in. But areas where there's plenty of competition, like long-range munitions and ground vehicles and fighter jets. Those are some of the areas where I think the market already competes well in that, and I don't think that getting involved in that would play well for the market.
What kind of influence would government gain on company strategy and governance by holding significant stakes, and how do you think this will affect perhaps management decision making?
Can you say that again? Sorry, I couldn't hear you.
How do you think government owning a significant stake will affect decision-making in the company or just the company's strategy in general?
Well, I think both, right? If you look at how you're actually setting it up, if you have that government stake in that, then you're obviously going to have an inside view of what's going on. So I think that plays a piece of it. I think from the government decision perspective is one of the risks that you need to worry about is when you look at a program that may not be going well, right? In the current construct, if you look at something like the Future Attack Reconnaissance Aircraft, something like that, right? The Army came in and said, this isn't a good investment. We're going to go in a different direction. It's built to be able to cut that tie. But if the government owns 10%, are they going to be even willing to do that? And who actually makes that cut? Where is the definition? Where is the legal definition that's going to come in to say, as Mr. Lutnick talked about today, was where is America adding fundamental value to your business? That specific statement. Okay, well then most of the areas within the defense capacity somewhat falls within that, right? So it would have to be a clearly defined thing in order for the market to understand where to go from there.
Wayne, appreciate you joining us. Always great to get some time with you. Also appreciate your patience standing by in D.C. as the president was speaking. That's Wayne Sanders. He's Bloomberg Intelligence defense analyst joining us from Washington, D.C. If you're sticking with us on Bloomberg Businessweek Daily, we got a great program coming up. We are all over the latest out of Washington on Fed Governor Lisa Cook, the market implications if the president's successful in firing her and removing her from the Board of Governors, also the market reaction, what it means for Fed independence, and more. That's next.